this year, it's mandatory to use the new COTA specifications, which has created a bit of havoc for some of the consultants who are busy drawing up their documents on the old standard. But effectively, all those projects and tenders, either design or construction tenders issued after the 1st of March, it's mandatory to actually use the COTA specifications. And as I mentioned, it applies to all state road authorities. The draft chapters, and there's 16 of them, I think it is, can be downloaded either from the SANRAL or DOT websites. There's no charge. They're freely available from either of those websites. Also on that website is an Excel spreadsheet where if you have comments or any suggestions or recommendations or improvements on various aspects of the various chapters, you can submit them on the Excel spreadsheets, which are there, and you need to submit it to cotarevision@nra.co.za anytime over the next 2 years. So if you're working with it, if you're a contractor, a supplier, and you find any issues there, please send your comments through so we can hopefully make the documents as perfect as possible before they are finalized. Just to also put it in perspective, to look at the old COTA content, it had 8 series, the ones that are listed there. For some reason, concrete pavements sat in the sundry structures section. It wasn't a separate section for concrete pavements. Obviously, all the structures were where the bridges were, but they had 8 series. Within those 8 series, there were 55 sections. And in A4 format, it was of the order of 400 pages of document. If you look at the new document in terms of COTA, it now has 15 chapters, 90 sections, and runs to around 1,300 pages. So it's in excess of 4 times bigger than the old one, with significant additions and improvements. For example, in the original COTA, it was mainly about construction of things rather than doing repair and treatment and things like that, and structures and rehabilitation of structures, very little on doing maintenance and repair. It was more about construction. So you can see how they're broken down at the moment. You'll notice that they only listed to number 14 and then number 20. 20 is all the quality assurance, which in the old one was in the 8000 series, for those of you who've used it. And the intention is that if there's a need to include any other chapters, there's obviously space for the numbering for their fit in. So the chapters that cover concrete, which is obviously the people on this call are probably primarily relevant or interested in, would be chapter 6 and 7, which deal with concrete pavements, concrete layers, and maintenance and repair of concrete layers. The other 2 would be concrete structures, structures, which include steel and concrete structures in the structures chapter, but there are sections there that deal specifically with concrete structures. And then chapter 14, which deals with repair and rehabilitation of structures, and chapter 20, which deals with quality assurance and sampling methods and lot sizes and what the requirements are, whether you get paid in full or don't get paid in full, all sit in the quality assurance. You'll also know that a lot of the test methods are in the process of changing, particularly the concrete test methods. And in chapter 20 as well, there's a list of all the old and new numbers. So another ready reference to be able to find old numbers, new numbers. There's also an appendix in the new Fulton, which also shows specifically all the concrete or aggregates for concrete and concrete test methods. Shows both the old ones and the proposed new ones that not all have been issued at the moment. Just before I cover the actual chapters covering concrete, some of you are aware that we're in the process of revising SANS 1083, which is the aggregates for concrete. Way back in the early 80s, it used to be concrete aggregates for construction, natural materials for aggregates for construction. For some reason, it was changed in the early 90s to only be natural aggregates, aggregates for concrete. The intention now is to amend it again to be called aggregates for construction. It will not be natural aggregates, it will be aggregates for construction. The intention is to have 6 parts. Part 1 is dealing with aggregates for concrete. Part 2, aggregates for mortar and plaster. Part 3, aggregates for gabions and ballast. Part 4, aggregates for asphalt. Part 5, aggregates for seals, surfacing seals. And Chapter 6, the road layers. So in other words, the G1 to G10 type materials. So we're busy working on that. It will also cover natural materials, non-natural or manufactured aggregates. So in other words, slags, ashes, things like that. And also recycled materials being able to be used. So we're busy working on it. It's taking a lot longer than we thought, but there is work progressing, and ultimately that document will then cover all aggregates for construction, rather than having separate ones for the different types of materials that you use. So there's 5 chapters that are specifically looking at concrete and concrete materials. Each chapter has a number of sections. So for example, in the concrete layers, there are 2 sections. One is for in situ concrete paving, and the second one is for interlocking block paving. So there's 2 sections in the concrete layers section. Each section has 4 parts. Part A is the specifications. Part B is labor enhancement. Part C is the measurement and payment items. And Part D, where relevant, where there are guarantees and compliance certificates that have to be provided. Notably, I know in the seals for concrete roads, there's normally performance guarantees that have to be provided on some of the contracts, and that would be in Part D. The intention of Part B is to try and improve the scope for labor. It's not labor-intensive construction, it's to try and improve the scope of what can be carried out by labor-based construction. It's not necessarily labor-intensive, but really to try and improve the scope so we can maximize labor usage on construction sites. And generally, the Part A specifications will apply unless they're changed in Part B. And when you go through it, you'll find a lot of the Part B just refers to Part A. It says as per Part A, as per Part A. So all the material specs and things like that would just refer to that as well. Then in each of those parts, and mainly the Part A and Part B, there's 8 subsections broken down into scope, definitions, general, where there's design by contractor, performance-based systems. So in other words, the mixed design for concrete would sit in that section there. The material specifications, they've separated construction equipment and the actual construction. So there's 2 parts to that. So it details what construction equipment you have to have. And then secondly, how you have to build it. And then lastly, workmanship, which will be all the acceptance criteria, the tolerances, and things like that. So it's a very extensive document. Unfortunately, because of the way it's been put together, there is some repetitive nature. And because all the chapters were put together by different groups of people, there's sometimes not total consistency. If you're interested in finding out more about these particular chapters, the South African Road Federation is running a series of webinars on the various chapters, not only the concrete ones, all the others. I ran a webinar on Tuesday and Wednesday on the Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. And I know Edwin Kruger and Dave Temple in the future are running on the structures and maintenance and repair of structures. So if you're interested in finding out in detail exactly what the new specification has, then go to the Road Federation's website and you'll be able to see where they are. For those that are interested in the concrete roads and repair, there's a follow-up. Another webinar is being run, I think it's the first week in July. So if anyone's interested in that. So as I mentioned, these 8 parts sit in the specifications and the labor enhancement. Obviously, part C is payment items, so that depends very much on the chapter as to what the payment items are. And then where there are guarantees and compliance requirements, there's 10 different parts to it. So in other words, scope, the general performance guarantee requirements, functional performance assessments, visually assessed properties, instrumentally assessed properties, so things like riding quality, all of those things, evaluation, procedures in event of failure, notification of remedial works and remedial works. So very, very detailed, comprehensive part where we're looking at guarantees and compliance certificates. So if we look at those 5 chapters that specifically deal with concrete, I mentioned originally chapter 6 has 2 sections, paver-laid concrete layers and second part segmental block paving layers, each with the 4 parts, and those 4 parts, either the first 2 having each of the 8 sections and the last one having the 11 sections. There's a bit of a problem with I was not involved. This chapter was very rushed. There's a whole lot of background to that. It was put together by one person, basically. And in terms of paving, they differentiate between paver-laid side form paving with a paver or slip form paving. Now, I'm not aware that there are any side form pavers available in the country. There are also none available. No one makes side form pavers anymore. So there's a whole section of that chapter 6.1 that really has become irrelevant. And in the 6.1 in the part B for labor intensive, there's virtually nothing there on how to construct the road, doing it labor intensively. And talking to Sanral, a lot of their contracts that are coming out, which I'll talk about just now, a lot of those, because they have this 30% requirement in the tenders, they're going to be doing it lane at a time using labor intensive materials. So that section really needs to be relooked at and rewritten. So that's what I've termed there the issue with the paving. They've included the old side form pavers, which we used to have in the country, but aren't available anymore to do it. So it's either done with a slip form paver or it's done by hand with vibrating beams, poker vibrators and things like that. If we look at chapter 7, in terms of maintenance and repair of concrete layers, the existing COLTA has some detail on remedial work in section 7125. Talks about removing concrete, removing high spots, repairing joints, repairing cracks, and rehabilitation by removal, placing, and retexturing and things like that. But all of that is covered in 1.5 pages, so very, very little detail in chapters in the section 7125. In the new chapter 7, it has 6 sections, and the total is now 32 pages. So the defects and repairs or maintenance and repair has gone from 1.5 pages to 32 pages in a lot more detail. And I think the reason for that is that a lot more of our concrete pavements are reaching the end of their life and are needing a lot more maintenance and repair. So the 6 sections in there are replacement of existing joint sealant, repairs to existing joints and uncontrolled cracks in concrete pavements. And there's a number of different repair methods depending on whether the crack is in the middle of a panel, whether it's very close to a joint, whether it hops in and out of a joint. So they're all different, and they're there for transverse joints and longitudinal joints. So there's a lot of different subsections within each of those. Removal and replacement of existing concrete layers. So in other words, where you've got to replace whole panels or a number of panels for whatever reason. That's covered under 7.3. They've covered a section on slab support by grout injection, either where you're just reinstating the support, where you're trying to fill a void underneath, or by slab jacking, where in other words, you've had some settlements due to the fill or void under the pavement, and you actually inject grout in there to actually lift it up. They've based it all on fairly old technology using cement-based grouts. And we have done some of that work before on the N3 going down to Durban at the dam, which is close to Escort, where that bridge, where the river goes under the freeway. We had some serious settlement. That would have been in the early 80s. Had some serious settlement there. And there what they did, they put a big beam across the area that had slacked, and then they lifted the slab to the right level and then filled the void in underneath. And then further north on that section, just near the Chigela Toll Plaza, they had some fairly bad settlement on fills. and there they actually jacked the pavement up using injecting grout. There's new technology around which is using polyurethane foam, which is far, far better. It's far quicker. With the grout, you have to leave the pavement. You're not allowed traffic on it for 4 days. If you use the polyurethane, you can actually put the traffic back after 60 minutes. So that will have to be added in, and I'll make recommendations on that. The 7.5 is reinstatement of riding quality, and that's in terms of diamond grinding. So where you end up with riding quality that's unacceptable, either because you didn't build it properly or because the pavement's old and the riding quality has suffered. So they allow both options there. And so one can do that generally with big diamond grinding. Unfortunately, we don't have any big diamond grinders in the country at the moment, but we're going to need to get them in for that. And then they've got a section there on 7.6, which is reinstatement of surface texture. Now, generally overseas, whenever they reinstate riding quality or texture, they do it longitudinally. So they grind longitudinally up the pavement, reinstating texture and riding quality, either with a proud ridge, which is the traditional grinding, or what they call the new generation grinding, where they basically plane the surface and cut slots into it. So it's almost like a deep texture, which is very, very low noise. Unfortunately, what they've got in the COTA document is that you have to reinstate that surface texture transversely. Now, I know they did some of that on the Ben Skuman, which was a pain. Normally, you need to try and keep the grooves randomly spaced, but if you're grinding a lane at a time, the grooves are also there for drainage. So you've then got to keep a uniform spacing of the joints so that you can line them up when you do second lane or the third lane. And the minute you do that, it increases the noise quite significantly. You get that tire hum if you've got uniform spacing. So that's going to have to be re-looked at in terms of modern technology overseas as well. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of comment and recommendations going into the replacement of these two chapters. Similarly, if we look at chapter 13 and 14, 13 deals with structures, and you can see what's in it. There's 14 sections. Obviously, foundations, falsework, formwork, and concrete finish, reinforcement, the concrete itself, pre-stressing, bearings, joints, ancillary structural elements, structural steelwork for minor structures, painting of minor structures, structural steelwork for major structures, steelwork protective treatment of major structures, a whole section on incremental launching of bridge decks, and then a section on specialist structures. And each of those 14 sections has the 4 parts, and each of those 4 parts has those 8 or 11 subsections to it. So it's fairly extensive in chapter 13. Chapter 14, which is repair and rehabilitation, has 11 sections, and they listed there access for bridge rehabilitation. Obviously, that's often an issue where the bridge needs repairing out over a wide river or a deep canyon. Corrosion survey methods and testing of near-surface concrete properties, demolition and removal of structural concrete and steelwork, surface and structural repair of concrete members, anchoring of reinforcement, grouting and crack injection, sprayed concrete for structures, protective coatings, external bonding of steel and carbon fiber, obviously where one needs to strengthen a structure, repair and replacement of ancillary steel structures, jacking of bridge structures, this would be where you have to lift it, and then repair of steel elements. Each of those with the 4 different parts. So all in all, there's a lot of changes there. If you're using the COTA document, those particular sections, I'd advise that you download them, familiarize yourself with what's in them. And if you're involved and use them, please submit your comments so that we can try and improve them as best we can. Hanley, I don't know if we want to take questions now, or should I go right to the end of the slide? There's only a few more slides.
Brian, I think carry on to the end of the slide, then we'll do questions.
Some of this information that I'm going to give you was presented by Lo Kanemo, who's the engineering executive for SANRAL, at a road pavement forum last week. So it's fairly up to date. And I think something that CONCRETEfiX, the series that we can aspire to at the Road Pavement Forum online webinar last week, we had 380 delegates attending. So something that we can hopefully aspire to with CONCRETEfiX, the series. So looking at, this is the project pipeline for 21, the current and the next 3 financial years. So in other words, 2021-22 to 23-24. In terms of broken down into terms of toll, non-toll, total, in design and construction, the projects that will be going out. So you can see there's a huge number of them. So all in all, 1,000 non-toll design and construction projects, 257 in the toll, so a total of 1,268. So if you take the total new tenders minus the 678, which is the construction, is n times 2 because there'll be design and construction. So you take these ones out. So a huge number of projects over the next 3 years. To put that into some perspective, in the current financial year, the 21-22 financial year, 2021 to 2022 financial year, they're hoping to issue projects, whether they design or construction projects, to the total value of 62 billion rand. Obviously, that won't all happen in 1 year. Some of those contracts will run for 2, 3, 4 years, but still 64 billion being issued in the next year. That looks pretty good, hopefully, for the construction industry. So I thought it'd be interesting to share that for you, give all of us in the construction industry some hope going forward for projects coming out. I think one area where there seems to be quite a lot of detail and where concrete's coming out, where a lot of concrete is involved, is on the N3, N2. And basically, there's 2 separate packages. The N3 package, to try and maximize up-and-coming consultants and smaller contractors, they've broken it down into, I think it's 16, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 12, 13 different contracts between Durban and Maritzburg, all broken down. Sometimes it's just an intersection or an interchange that's upgraded. Other ones, it's a part of the road. Some places there's a bit of realignment, and it also involves fixing some of the ancillary roads around it as well. Largely what they're doing on the N3 is widening to 4 lanes each way. And some of you who travel on that road will know that it currently only sits at about 2 lanes in some places. It's reconfiguration of most of the interchanges. As I said, there's 13 detailed design packages. They may go out in smaller construction, so there may be more than 13 construction packages going out. Some of them on this particular section on the N3 have been awarded already. And if you add up the total volume of concrete that is in those particular contracts, there's about nearly 650,000 cubic meters of concrete in terms of either structures or in terms of pavements. So a lot of good work for the concrete industry in that part of the world, for suppliers as well. The second part of it is basically upgrading from the Lovu River, so sort of from almost close to Umhlanga all the way down to Mamzimtoti. And there it's been broken down into smaller packages, into six or seven different packages. And there's quite a lot of detail that's available on this. Also widening to 4 lanes. In some cases, I believe it goes up to 5 lanes in each way. Reconfiguration of most interchanges. A lot of work on the Edwin Swales to EB Kluter, and redoing both of those big interchanges, making them free-flowing interchanges. So there's a lot of work there. Again, maybe broken down into smaller. Concrete volumes, 165,000, mainly in the structures, and effectively nearly 1 million cubic meters of concrete in paving, and it all seems to be in that EB Kluter to Edwin Swales section, which will all be concrete and the interchanges and everything like that. So there's a huge amount of concrete. If it goes out as one project, it may be broken down into smaller packages. So I think hopefully that's given you some hope for the future, especially working down in that part of the world. Supplying for the contractors, they work everywhere, but maybe for suppliers, it's good news if you're in that part of the world, if you're supplying cement. So hopefully it's given you some hope for the future in terms of our cement industry, concrete industry, and the construction industry. So Hanli, thanks very much.
Thank you, Brian, for that interesting presentation. Now we've got time for a couple of questions. Please, if you've got any questions, would you pose them? Anybody with a question for Brian? Just remember to unmute yourself if you need to ask a question. Brian, it seems like you're off the hook at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if you get a flurry of emails afterwards asking the questions. But really, everybody, thank you for joining us today. I hope you've been inspired by both the future of the industry body and the future of cement and concrete. We believe in our material, we believe in the future, and we know that COVID might have changed many of the things that we do, but it has not killed our industry. We've had to adapt to certain things, and I think we're going to carry on adapting for quite a while to come. But before I say a final goodbye, Kevin, you've raised your hand. Kevin, you can proceed. Just unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Hanli, and thank you to Brian for that presentation as well. And maybe a question would be on, so the previous COLTO document came with a number of standard forms for the approval of, for example, asphalt mixes, concrete mixes in the form of the D6 form for concrete pavements and the D2 form for structural concrete. And my question to Brian is he aware of any updates to those documents, and if they have been published or provided along with the new COTO document?
Thanks, Kevin. Now, I'm not aware of that. If I think about the D2 or D6 documents, a lot of the technical requirements in terms of mix design for concrete pavements, for example, where you've got to do the three water cement ratios and you've got to do all of those flexion, that hasn't really changed in the document. So at this stage, I don't see too much change in those sorts of requirements. But there you'd have to check with Senral. I'm not aware of any of the standard forms, whether they have changed or whether they're likely to change. I think some of them may have to in the light of some of the changes in the specification, but I'm not aware of that. That you'd have to check with Senral.
Thanks, Brian.
Have I missed any other hands? It doesn't seem like it. So I think this concludes today's session. If you're not a member of Cement and Concrete SA, please contact Natasha, get detail on membership, and look out for the notice about the next CONCRETEfiX, the series. Thank you for joining us. Have a good evening and goodbye.